There are videos out there ranking the works of pretty much every animation studio under the sun. A kind of video I might try myself someday for us to do with a small enough number of movies. But for today, I'm going to throw them all in the ring to tackle a topic that I haven't seen anyone else cover. Which animation studio had the best first movie? Well, I can't really give any kind of objective answer to that, but I can go into how I'd personally order them in terms of my own preference. Now, I should clarify what I'm counting, since it's not feasible for me to include literally every animation studio that exists. I want to keep this a manageable amount of movies after all. I made an effort to include what are, as far as I can tell, the big names over in the US and UK. So, in release order, the films I'll be covering are Walt Disney Animation Studios' Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Studio Ghibli's Castle in the Sky since it was the first one they made after forming, Nausicaa predates the studio's formation and was only added to their lineup retroactively, Warner Bros. Animation's Batman Mask of the Phantasm, Pixar's Toy Story, DreamWorks' Ants, Aardman's Chicken Run, Blue Sky's Ice Age, Sony Pictures Animation's Open Season, Laika's Coraline, Cartoon Saloon's The Secret of Kells, Illumination's Despicable Me, Warner Bros. Pictures Animation's The Lego Movie. Yes, there are two Warner Bros. Films here because they're technically different studios that exist separately and are both still putting out projects. You can realistically pick either of them, but I wanted to go for both of them. Paramount Animation's SpongeBob SquarePants movie Sponge Out of Water, and finally Netflix's Klaus. Okay, now that we know what counts and it's been clarified that this is only being ordered by how much I like the movies, let's get on with the ranking.
Oh my god, young man, kill you!
I have a little bit of history with my last place pick. See, I used to babysit for a family friend, and sometimes the kid would put a movie or a show on Netflix. Whether I would watch it with him would depend on whether I was busy with anything else at the time. And one of the times I did stick around for the whole thing ended up being for Open Season. I did not like it at all, to the point of calling it one of my all-time least favourite films. But I was willing to go into this rewatch with an open mind. I mean, that was years ago. It could have been a knee-jerk reaction, and maybe I'd find at least a few elements of fun. No, I was right on the money, this movie is insufferable. What sucks is that I can see a potentially investing story buried in there about this bear's adoptive mother raising him and having to let him go back out into the wilderness. To give the movie its credit, they do have a handful of mildly charming interactions. And if they'd focused on their bond and how they miss each other when they're separated, I could have at least respected the attempt at an emotional through line. Instead of that though, Boog is only concerned about whether he'll get his comfortable life back rather than whether he'll see his mother figure again. It makes him way less likable, lessens the stakes, and removes any impact when he chooses to say goodbye in the end. He clearly doesn't care that much about her if he's gonna leave her to stay with the rest of these dickhead animals who he's known for a few days tops and have been consistently horrible to him. Well, okay, maybe it'll be about the potential ramifications of excessive hunting. I mean, the villain never shuts up about the natural order, so it could be interesting to explore the impact that his actions have on these animals' lives. In fact, he's not that bad of a villain. He's an active threat, and while he wasn't making me laugh or anything, I could see where they were going with making him this manic conspiracy nut when he sees the animals walking like humans and working together. But no, they don't really do much with that either. There's just an action climax for the sake of an action climax, and I didn't care what was happening at any point. I've said before, no environmental message is going to work when the animal characters are so unlikable that I'm actively rooting for the hunters to shoot them. Keep in mind, I don't need a movie to have some deeper meaning to get anything out of it. I was one of the people who had a pretty good time with the Mario movie. If the story, characters, or whatever else can at least keep me entertained, that's really all I need. Too bad this movie doesn't have that. It's just a series of meandering kids movie shit with juvenile humor, irritating characters, and terrible pacing. Boog and Elliot are not a good main duo. I already got across my main gripe with the former, and the dumbass deer might be the most annoying character ever conceived. He fucks everything up, Boog puts up with him out of necessity, they never really have a chance to bond before they're suddenly cool with each other, then they get lost one time and Boog is suddenly mad again, then after the cliche third act breakup, Boog changes his mind even though Elliot's ruined his life and taken advantage of him and done absolutely nothing to make up for it. Not even so much as apologize. Anytime they try to force an emotional beat with him, it falls flat on its face. Every side character they meet along the way is obnoxious as well. From the wasted casting of Patrick Warburton on this asshole deer, to Sonic the Hedgehog who repeats the same line over and over, to the skunks who make the exact jokes you'd expect. Oh wow, the squirrel's Scottish, he's just like me, for real guys. I want him to fuck off out of my sight forever. They want me to feel bad when they're washed away into the hunting grounds, but they're all jackasses who I can't feel an ounce of sympathy for. Every other joke is the kind of terrible gross out and screaming that I expected. They did not make me laugh or even so much as crack a smile once. The only thing I could see working on paper is the shadow puppet bit where it looks like Elliot's getting mauled. But the framing of it is really awkward when Beth is screaming at Book to stop from the other side of the curtain, even though she is fully capable of getting closer to him and seeing that nothing's wrong. It takes a great deal for a movie to be a 1 out of 10 in my eyes. There have been plenty of awful pieces of garbage that I've seen in the last few years that I can manage to salvage enough positive elements out of to raise it up that tiny bit. But I can't do it for this one. I mean it with full sincerity that I would rather rewatch Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate over this. And there is minimal hyperbole when I say that if I ever watch the sequels without it being to fulfill a separate purpose, or a friend inviting me to a movie night or something, then it should be taken as a cry for help and a sign of a bad mental state. If you couldn't tell, I hate this movie. It's every terrible kids movie trope you've ever seen rolled into one. A lot of people I follow were able to get ironic enjoyment out of it, and I wish I was among you. But the movie got on my nerves too much for that to be the case. I guess some people will also unironically like it, and that's cool too. Please let me know in the comments why if you do, because you clearly see something that I don't.
Did you know that at any given moment, there are about 2.5 million ants under your feet?
All of the praise sent towards the Prince of Egypt is absolutely justified. It might not be the DreamWorks film that connects the most with me personally, but I can absolutely see why it's so frequently heralded as their best work to date. Such striking animation, a godlike score, gripping characters. It's an absolute masterpiece that I like better than most, if not all, of the Disney Renaissance that released that same decade. And it would have made for an easy high placement on this list if DreamWorks released that one first rather than rushing out a diet version of A Bug's Life. And that's not a great descriptor to have because I already don't feel that much towards the actual A Bug's Life, even if I do still like it. Ants is a comparatively miserable experience with none of that movie's charm or greatest strengths. And any similarities in the content all tends to favour A Bug's Life. They tackle similar themes of individuality and rising up against an oppressive system, but the way Ants does it is so much more repetitive and ham-fisted. Despite all the mild swears and odd level of horniness present throughout a lot of it, the way the messages are spoon-fed over and over feels like it's directed at little kids, which leaves me wondering who this was even for. Parents aren't going to want their kids to hear about this dude's erratic fantasies, and adults are going to feel talked down to. Bug's Life handled it a lot better by having the main character's unique trait contribute to the takedown of the villain with the gadget that they build, and said villain is running circles around this one. Hopper has a level of menace and makes points far more brutally. General Mandible in comparison is much more forgettable and boring. Nothing he does is going to stick with me like Hopper's grain scene. The other characters don't fare much better, particularly our main duo. Z and Princess Bala are such annoying leads. All they do is whine and complain and they never shut the hell up. It's all in service of the wacky jokes in this movie, which fell flat for me a majority of the time. Not only are most of them not timed well, but the voice acting especially doesn't do them any favours. I was not into Woody Allen or Sharon Stone's performances here. They barely emote half the time and it made it so much harder for me to get invested in their story. Not that I would have regardless, because their obligatory romance plot is as predictable and uninteresting as I could have possibly imagined. The only character I liked was Barbatus, but he gets one scene and then he dies. Rest in peace, legend. At least his death scene's actually pretty good. This shot of the aftermath on the battlefield is surprisingly brutal and effective. I also kinda like the climax with all of them forming the ladder to escape the flood. Every now and again there's a solid joke or visual gag. The animation's actually kind of impressive for the time if you can look past the horrific character designs and just focus on the amount of stuff happening on screen at once. I like some of the set pieces that are created around their small size. It's not devoid of things for me to like. There just isn't much reason for me to go back to it when A Bug's Life is just this but better and actually enjoyable. Their similar concepts and themes make it way too clear that this was just a rush job created out of Jeffrey Katzenberg's pettiness. Actually, that reminds me of a tweet that pointed at how these were two of the three first 3D animated features, meaning there was a point where 2/3 of all CGI animated movies were about ants. That piece of trivia is more interesting than anything actually in this film.
Well, the first half was fantastic. Second half was a complete disaster.
Paramount Animation was not initially on this list until I asked around to see if I'd missed anything worth including. Someone pointed out that I didn't have Paramount, so I took a look at their filmography and saw I'd get to talk about a SpongeBob movie, which means I can put him in the thumbnail. Talk about a win-win. Oh wait, no, it's not the original one, it's Sponge Out of Water. A movie I remember underwhelming me even when I was 12. Well, I mean, you never know, it could get better. Even if it didn't, I still remember it being decent. And on a rewatch, I did actually get a lot of enjoyment out of the first half. It had a solid enough story with the unlikely duo of SpongeBob and Plankton having to find the formula, and it was honestly pretty funny. It had its misses, but I was laughing pretty consistently and having a good time with it. Then almost exactly at the halfway mark, it takes a sudden nosedive. After they start time traveling, the jokes from then on were just not hitting me, and the pacing goes down the drain with so much more filler that doesn't progress anything and conveys a complete lack of urgency for the characters to get through their quirky, cartoon character explores the real world misadventures. Abandoning the previously good-looking 2D animation for admittedly still mostly well done but comparatively charmless CGI mixed in with live action. Then out of nowhere it becomes a superhero action movie in the last 20 minutes because this was during the peak of the Phase 2 MCU craze. And you better believe this took up the bulk of the marketing. The action's honestly kinda lame, the villain is barely a character and is solely carried by Antonio Banderas' voice. It isn't funny in spite of how badly it clearly wants to be, and every character feels completely incompetent. Now maybe that's supposed to be the joke, but I don't know, it feels like they really want me to find this all BA badass when it just isn't. Hell, the show has done that exact joke before to much greater effect. While I'm pointing that out though, there is a lot of stuff here that feels like it's just repeating what the show already did. SpongeBob tries to connect with Plankton as they sing a song about their bond. Plankton tries to get the formula from SpongeBob's brain and it doesn't go well. SpongeBob returns to the Krusty Krab after a while and finds it buried underground. Bubbles' design is damn near identical to Dream Gary's. Even the time travel stuff isn't new ground. And that's just the examples I can think off the top of my head. There could very well be more that I've forgotten. Some stuff like Mr. Krabs turning into the Crabborg or Patrick saying Finland or whatever else can be excused as blatant references, but all of it leads to feeling like this movie doesn't have much of an original bone in its body. And even that aside, I don't think it's too strong of a standalone movie. The first film would have been a solid contender for the top 5 on this list since it remains funny all the way through, has effective emotional beats, having more focus on its story with any detours serving a purpose, and gets across a strong message about how growing up doesn't mean you have to pretend you're someone you're not and stop enjoying the things that make you happy. Sponge Out of Water just does not compare. The jokes drop off halfway through, a lot of the attempts at emotional beats end up feeling forced or undercut with a joke, and its messages about teamwork and trust aren't half as compelling. The only thing I can think of this has over the original is that it gives more screen time to more of the main characters, but it definitely goes for quantity over quality because none of them outside of SpongeBob and Plankton have anything to do. Oh well, I enjoyed the first half enough at least to stop me from fully disliking it, and I prefer it to what I remember of Sponge on the Run, but you're not missing much if you haven't seen it. All you need to do is watch the two best scenes. The ERB at the end, and yes, they actually got ERB, this is real, and the one where the reverb fart sound plays as Plankton's tank explodes. Yes, Plankton farts and dies is indeed real. It truly was the scene-carrying movie. He never misses, the absolute legend.
What's the secret of Kel's?
I wish I liked The Secret of Kells more than I do. I've seen some of Cartoon Saloon's output before, and they are an incredible studio. I loved Wolfwalkers and absolutely adored Song of the Sea, but with Kells I'm a lot more lukewarm on it. The animation has to do a lot of the heavy lifting here. It replicates the style of the real-life book of Kells and looks drop-dead gorgeous. Occasionally I'll get thrown off by the lack of depth or disoriented with a sudden jump between locations or camera angles with no lead-up or frame of reference, but that's a small price to pay for this level of detail and such striking colours. I found that my favourite scenes in the film were the ones that let the animation do the bulk of the talking, like the harsher Reg when the Northmen invade Kells, or the otherworldly feel of Brendan's battle with Crom Cruach. Just about every shot is a feast for the eyes. I can't say I was as overwhelmingly won over in any other category though. It tells a pretty standard disobeying the parental figure to go somewhere you're not supposed to story with not all that interesting characters. I like Brendan and Aisling's scenes of getting to spend time with each other, which thankfully never turns into a romance, but we also don't get to see a whole lot of it. I wanted to like Calic more than I did because Brendan Gleeson voices him, so all I hear is Knuckles McGinty, and he does give my favourite vocal performance in the movie. He makes the character feel very cold and distant, letting it stand out more when he does emote. But he's not very interesting. He's your typical unwilling to listen protective guardian, and we never get any scenes to show a positive relationship between him and Brendan, so I don't feel nearly as much as I wish I could when they both think the other is dead. Aiden and Pangarban are decent as well. The latter gets another one of my favourite scenes where he goes on his ghost heist, but overall I'd say there aren't any characters that I've fully clicked with. And the story is paced in a kind of weird way that takes its time for the first hour or so. Then the finale has this time skip that feels very out of nowhere and leads to a disappointingly anticlimactic ending. It very much feels like stuff is missing from that short 75-minute runtime. They don't end up doing anything with Aisling after the last we saw of her, seeming like she was in some kind of danger. We barely spend any time with Brandon and Calic apart. I don't know, it's not a particularly satisfying finale. The ending where we do get to see the completed book though is mesmerizing. mesmerizing. Not gonna deny that for a second. All in all, it's not a bad story or set of characters. There are charming interactions, and the threat of the Northmen approaching provides stakes and tension to keep me somewhat invested, and there's not much I can point to as particularly annoying outside of the scene where Brendan tries to go into the cave like a dumbass because he weirdly thinks he knows better about the forest and what's in it than the supernatural creature that lives there. If you want pretty visuals and to see a film about Irish folklore, I'd say Secret of Kells is worth a watch. Those with a passion for that will likely get more out of it than me. Though in that same breath, I'd recommend Song of the Sea and Wolfwalkers over it any day. They also show off Irish folklore with even more gorgeous animation and stories I could actually get really emotionally invested in. I can't stress enough that Cartoon Saloon makes really good movies. If this is their weakest one and it still isn't bad, and it's their first one meaning they only kept getting better, then that tells me they know what they're doing. Well, I mean, I haven't seen Breadwinner or Father's Dragon yet, but I hear good things about them, so I'll have to take people's word on that before I get around to checking them out myself.
Come on! I can make bread with it!
I respect and admire Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs more than I actually enjoy watching it. That's not to say I didn't have a good time with it, I did enjoy myself, but a lot of that is because of the novelty of it being a piece of animation history. Compared to similar groundbreaking films like Toy Story looking dated next to films Pixar put out only a few years later, Snow White still holds up to modern day standards despite being the funny number of years old. Sure, that can be partly attributed to the kind of animation it is, but even still, this is absurdly impressive for the first feature-length animated film ever made. The characters all move so fluidly, and the dwarves in particular are super expressive. I also quite like the scene where Snow White's running in the forest. It feels like it made the most of the medium to get across how nightmarish everything looked to her while she was panicked. I can't say most of the songs did too much for me, but the score did stand out to me as pretty great as well. A lot of actions are punctuated with the music syncing up to them, and that's really charming. I can say the same for the movie's sense of humour as well. It's not laugh out loud funny, but it's got a ton of great visual gags and slapstick. In terms of the story and characters though, I can't say this movie did a whole lot for me, and that's partly down to how it's paced. I enjoy the dwarves enough, but so many of their scenes wear out their welcome by the end for me because they drag on for so long. I'm not opposed to a slice of life movie where not much happens, but this movie has a story it wants to tell that it casts to the side for the bulk of the runtime and leaves it feeling underbaked. The Queen tries to have Snow White killed at the start, the hunter guy lets her live, which was a nice bit of characterization for him, I liked that, and then the Queen doesn't find out until halfway through, where she spends ages making the potion and doesn't see her stepdaughter again until the last 10 minutes. Then she's chased away and killed immediately, Snow White's dead for a little bit, and then the prince who's been in one total scene before now comes in to save the day with true love's first kiss, and then she's fine. I really don't like this ending. The prince needed to be set up as an active part of the film way earlier. The only thing we know about him by the time he and Snow White go off to live together is that he instinctively kisses the corpses of strangers on the mouth. The two of them have barely interacted before this, and yet I'm still supposed to believe Snow White fawning over him. It's honestly the least convincing romance on this whole list. Like, the characters in Ants may be insufferable, but at least they had the bare minimum of spending some time together to form a bond. It's a shame. I think this movie could have had a solid story if they didn't meander so much and then rush at a breakneck pace to get everything done in the last 10 minutes. And while the characters are enjoyable enough, I don't think it's to the extent to where I want to see their antics for this long with nothing happening. Snow White's a nice person but kinda bland as a character. The Queen is entertainingly evil but lacking in any kind of interesting motivation or active threatening presence for half the film with a really dumb and needlessly complicated plan. And while I do like the titular Seven Dwarves, it's not enough to stop me from getting a little bored of how drawn out some of their scenes get. If I had to pick a favourite of the dwarves though, I gotta go with Senshi. He's a funny guy and I like when he did the Ratatouille scene, but that's too obvious, so I'll say Grumpy's second place. I've harped on a lot of my issues with the movie, but I should emphasise that I did ultimately enjoy my time with it. It might have its fair share of problems with its writing, but it's nonetheless very charming with excellent animation and music. It's worth a watch if for no reason other than being the first animated feature ever made.
Thought it was them goddamn squirrels!
I'm pretty sure I watched all of the Ice Ages growing up, except weirdly enough the fourth film specifically, but for the life of me I could not remember much about them, except again the fourth one because my friend Dawn dragged me into a call to watch it a few years ago. I just vaguely remember them all being kinda mediocre and wasn't planning to ever go back to any of them until I made this video. And yep, the start to this movie gave me exactly what I was expecting. Fun slapstick with Scrat that I struggle to enjoy as much because of his annoying screaming, groan-worthy jokes as soon as the animals start talking, and Sid did not endear me at all. This is looking to be your generic animated family movie. Then strangely enough, the film actually managed to catch me off guard and get a laugh out of me.
You were bluffing, huh?
Yeah, that was a bluff.
Wasn't expecting that, but I'm sure that'll be a one-time thing. Then, to my surprise, I actually kind of got into the rest of the movie. Sid remained a weak link for the entire runtime, but the other characters worked kinda well for me. Manny's trauma about losing his family is handled shockingly maturely. I've heard the excellent cave painting scene get praised plenty of times before, but I didn't see much credit given to how it's hinted towards multiple times beforehand, with how he immediately turns away when Sid asks about his family, and is later clearly affected by the baby hugging him more than you'd expect. We get everything we need to know about him without him having to say a single word about it, and I think it's really impressively done. It's nice to see him form a bond with the others as well, to the point where he's willing to risk his life to save Diego. Speaking of Diego, I really liked his development too. He sticks with Manny and Sid out of necessity at first so he has food to bring back for his pack, but the more he connects with the others, the more unsure he gets about whether he can go through with it, with Manny saving his life being what finally pushes him over the edge to switch sides. He's able to develop in a really natural and well-paced way. And all three characters becoming a found herd as they take the baby home results in plenty of fun scenes like the slide chase, and some genuinely sweet moments like when they watch it take its first steps. I got way more invested in this story than I expected, and despite the low expectations I had for the humour, which still remained kinda hit or miss through to the very end, I did still get some genuine laughs. A lot of the jokes are more laid back and reliant on the fun banter between the characters, some of which did land for me. It's similar to what Shrek 1 does, and I've seen people call it a ripoff because of that, and yeah, Shrek attempts the same kinds of jokes, the dynamic between Manny and Sid is basically just Shrek and Donkey again, and Shrek did do it all way better. But calling it a ripoff seems a bit harsh. The movies released less than a year apart. I don't think there was enough time for this to be blatant plagiarization. The movie has its problems like the dated animation, undercooked group of villains that waste the casting of Jack Black, and it has parts that don't serve as much more than filler. It's no masterpiece, and I wouldn't say that I love it, not even close, but while a good amount of it is what you could expect from your average family animated movie, other parts are genuinely really well handled, which managed to elevate it a good bit for me. It did manage to win me over in the end, and I'm so pleasantly surprised to be able to say that considering I was expecting to be lukewarm on it at best. I'm not rewatching any of the sequels to see what I think about those though, no thanks.
I'm going to give you the moon!
In spite of Illumination's reputation and the decade of minion oversaturation following its release, I think Despicable Me holds up as a pretty good movie. Not just, oh it's mediocre but good by Illumination standards. No, I like this one quite a bit on its own merits. Yes, it does have some juvenile humour and filler bullshit, and it sucks that Illumination decided that those weaknesses should be their takeaway from this movie rather than its strengths. But honestly, it has way less of it than most of their other films, as well as the stuff ranked lower on this list. Even the minions, which I'd expect to hate, honestly aren't all that bad in this. Outside of when they derail the film's focus so we can see their hijinks in the supermarket, I don't think they overstay their welcome. They serve enough of a purpose within the story, and some bits with them are even kinda funny. Compared to the annoying seagulls and Sponge Out of Water, or literally every character in Open Season, them being mildly charming background characters is a breath of fresh air. Obviously though, the minions are not the highlight of the movie for me. That would be kinda sad if they were. I think Gru is a really good protagonist to center the film around. I enjoy Steve Carell's performance. Like, you'd expect the silly voice to get annoying, but it weirdly never does for me. He's responsible for plenty of the movie's funniest moments. Like when he asked Nefario,
Why are you so old?
that makes me lose it every time. Overall, I actually got more laughs out of this film than I expected. The jokes that I liked far exceeded any of the misfires and potty humour. Everything Vector said and did was comedy gold. He's such a fucking dweeb, I love him. Even more shockingly though is how this movie does have a strong emotional core. I like seeing Gru and his new adopted daughters form a bond as he's forced to spend more time with them, then eventually ending up enjoying himself so much that he starts to neglect his villainy to be a better parent. The context we get later of how his own mother neglected him, likely what made him grow up to be a villain, and that having him not know how to show affection until near the end where he embraces his role as their father is kinda touching. It's a well-paced arc that's satisfying to watch unfold, and some scenes do hit kinda hard, like when Gru starts to connect with the book he reads them, or when he arrives too late at the dance recital. Hell, they even managed to get away with some tropes that would normally get on my nerves. The third act breakup is done naturally since Nefario was the one to force it to happen, and the dance party ending is kinda nice since it's Gru's way of making up for missing their show. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that Despicable Me is some kind of overlooked masterpiece, or even that I love it, but what I will say is that I think it's good. Easily my favourite that I've seen from Illumination. I said before that the Mario movie was neck and neck with it, but the more time passes, the more that gap widens. All it has in comparison is the animation, score, and Mario fanservice, and I think that's generally what the consensus is. It's nothing mind-blowing and has its shortcomings, but it's the only time from what I've seen that Illumination has had a compelling story that they wanted to tell, while balancing good jokes, fun action, and making more or less every character endearing in some way. If only the studio took away the right lessons from it.
Oh
gnomes now.
Chicken Run is the movie here that I'd already rewatched the most recently in order to prepare for its sequel last year. And even then, I was still looking forward to going back to it again because it's just that great. Aardman is one of my favourite animation studios out there. Not just for how consistently amazing their stop motion looks, but I generally tend to click with how their movies are written. A lot of their humour comes from their witty wordplay and interactions between their really charming characters, which both apply to this movie. This is a really funny film. If you look at the chickens are revolting scene and don't at least crack a smile, I question if you're even alive. Everything Mr. Tweedy said in particular is gold. Tony Hagar's deliveries are top notch, and so many of his lines have been recurring jokes with my friends for a while now. If I've ever replied to someone with then it can be assumed I'm referencing Mr. Tweedy. Honestly, he's up there as one of my favourite Aardman and even DreamWorks villains. He's not deep, but he's hysterical and poses enough of a threat alongside his much more menacing wife, who he crushes at the end, and that's never set up or addressed afterwards, and I think that makes it even funnier. He also does the guy losing his mind when he sees animals acting intelligent bit way funnier than Shaw. While beating open season to the punch by 6 years, that movie cannot stop taking L's today. Even with all that ironic adoration though, he's not my favourite character in the film. That would be Ginger, another one of my favourite characters across the entirety of both studios' lineups. She herself says that one chicken escaping is easy work, but she chooses to stay with her own life at risk so that she has a chance to free the others as well, acting as the spark of hope for everyone else. When Bunty tells her that they've only got a 1 in a million shot of getting out, and Ginger just replies with, "Then there's still a chance," that's one of the most powerful lines in any film on this list. I really love the dynamic she has with Rocky because they both have such different approaches for how to give people hope. Ginger remains grounded in reality and puts on an optimistic facade for the sake of everyone else's morale, while Rocky stretches the truth and tells everyone what they want to hear. I think it's pretty interesting stuff, and it proves the difference in effectiveness when Ginger losing that hope results in everyone else doing the same, with Rocky's lies only making everyone feel worse. While I'm on that, I've heard the criticism that the flying lessons ultimately feel like a waste of time and that they didn't get to focus much on the plane, and I'll raise that that was probably the point. Having so much of the character's hope hinge on Rocky's lies only makes it sting more when he abandons them all, and the big reveal scene conveys everything it needs to without a single line of dialogue. You're told everything you need to know, from Rocky leaving behind the last bit of the poster and the medal he was given as a show of his courage and honour, with the dread setting in for everyone else when they realised that their last sliver of hope was never real, and that they'd been chasing an unachievable goal. And they couldn't have been building the plane from the start because they needed to trade their eggs for the gay rats to help them out, which they could only do as a do-or-die last resort once the eggs were no longer needed to save them from execution. Once they do get to the plane stuff, it provides such a hectic and fun climax that surpasses even the previous action rescue scene inside of the pie machine. I love seeing a good prison break scene, and this is the best in a movie chock full of fun ones. If I had any gripes with this movie, I guess I'd say that the side characters are a bit of a mixed bag. I enjoy Fowler and the gay rats, not so much Bunty or Babs, who didn't work all that well for me as comedic reliefs. I didn't mind Mac because she just liked me for real, but for as much as I can appreciate a good Scottish people talk funny joke, because it's true, we do, I kinda got bored of her after a while. Also, while I have no issue with how Rocky coming back in the climax was handled, I rolled my eyes when he and Ginger kissed and got together in the end. I really liked the connection they formed, but I never felt the kind of chemistry that sold me on them as a couple. Maybe I missed something, or maybe it's just a me thing because I struggle to care about romances in general. This doesn't quite reach the level of my favourites on this list, but I love this movie a lot, and I think it absolutely deserves its spot in the top half. I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it already. Just maybe don't watch 8 Crazy Nights directly before it. I can confirm from experience that it will not make it seem better by comparison, it'll just leave you too mentally exhausted to fully appreciate it.
It's my story. A Toy Story.
Don't know if you picked up on it from the half-hour unbridled praise I did earlier this year, but I have quite a bit of fondness for Pixar's older movies. I didn't include the Toy Stories in that 2000s ranking to make the workload a little more manageable for me, and now from how high the first one is ranked here, you can see that that absolutely isn't because I have anything against the film itself. I adore Toy Story, it's a classic for a reason, to an extent where I don't know what else there is to say about it that hasn't been said already. It's not a film that gives me a ton to talk about, it's just really fun and set the stage for how Pixar could take such creative concepts or hidden worlds separate from our own and give so much emotional weight to the stories they tell with them. I like Woody enough as a protagonist. I'll admit that in terms of Pixar's earliest jerkish leads, he is the weakest link to me, but even if he isn't quite as compelling to me as Marlin, Mr. Incredible if he counts, or hell, even Lightning McQueen, I still think it's fairly impactful to see his friendship with Buzz grow until he's able to accept that Andy might have a new favourite toy, and that his own status doesn't matter as long as they're both there for their kids. He has plenty of jerkish animation moments, yeah, but I don't think they quite go too far to push him into being unlikable. And whenever he is being a dick, he gets his comeuppance for it. It gives a nice message for the kids that jealousy and resentment aren't really going to get you anywhere. He's not the star of the show for me though. For the only time in the series, my favourite character in this film is Buzz. I'm not a huge fan of how the sequels handled him. He's great in the second one, reset for the bulk of the third, and annoyingly stupid in the fourth. But the first is the only one that gives him much of an arc. I liked his identity crisis and how he's able to move past it when Woody's able to open his eyes to a new purpose in his life. Just because he isn't who he thinks he was doesn't make him worthless. It's also funny to see him think he's an actual spaceman. In general, actually, this is one of the funnier movies on the list. Not all the jokes land, but the ones that do are hysterical. The vocal performances and comedic timing are pitch perfect, contributing to plenty of hilarious scenes. I always forget because of how often they're memed, but even without any edits, I think the Buzz looking alien and You Are a Toy bits are some of the funniest things Pixar has ever put out. They had me in stitches. The movie's also got a few solid songs, an iconic score, and a stellar final act where Woody uses his own personal strength in leading a large group of toys to plan an elaborate rescue mission for Buzz where they traumatize this neglected child. The final truck chase is a ton of fun too, and I don't think it's too much of a stretch to call the Falling with Style bit one of the most iconic sequences in animation history. This isn't quite one of Pixar's top tiers for me. Plenty of their other works hit way harder emotionally, have more compelling characters, or have more to say. If this was included in my 2000s ranking, then I would have only placed it above the bottom 2. Same with the third film, and 2 would have only placed 1 spot higher. Again, very stacked lineup, not a bad thing to rank on the lower end. But at the same time, I can't say there's much about it that doesn't work for me. Sure, you can point to the animation, but I think in the context of this being the very first feature-length CGI movie, it holds up fairly well. Even just not being last place next to the 2000s film should tell you that I love Toy Story with all my heart. It's a childhood classic that I still get a ton of enjoyment out of to this day, spawning a series I hold so near and dear to me. But please stop making more of them, Pixar. I am begging you, let it die with whatever dignity it has left. Whoa, what's the Studio Ghibli movie doing so high up? If there are 2 constants about any studio on this list, it's that 1, Ghibli makes really good movies, and 2, I'm more scared of their copyright strike bottle than all of the others combined, so I am gonna do my best to keep this brief. That will also explain the heavily altered or complete lack of footage, so apologies about that, just bear with me. Castle in the Sky is incredible. I was worried that it wouldn't hold up as well as I remembered now that I've seen Ghibli movies that have more interesting characters, stories, and themes. And yeah, it's not quite top tier, but my opinion of it is no worse off than it was when I first saw it 4 years ago. It has everything I love about the studio's usual output. Stunning animation and music, likable characters, a simple but compelling story, and the signature brand of Ghibli charm that nobody else can quite capture in the same way. It has the pro-environmental and anti-war messages that I've come to associate Miyazaki with, and this is probably their most adventurous and grandest in scope work that I've seen. It's got fantastic tense action scenes, and made me nervous for the characters' lives in a way unlike anything else on this list. The climax is not for anyone with a fear of heights, I'll say that much. And yet, despite how dire things look towards the end, the movie never loses its lighter, more whimsical elements that make it such a delight to just vibe with. And holy shit, when they actually arrive in Laputa, it took my breath away. One of the most stunning locations I've ever seen in animation, capturing the scale of it all perfectly while leaving so much about the culture and how it used to look up to the viewer's imagination. Honestly, I think it rivals the Spirit World from Spirited Away. Nobody else does it like Ghibli. That's not to say I think the movie is as strong as Spirited Away overall. For as much as I like Sheeta and Patsu and think their chemistry is adorable, I don't think any of the characters are as compelling as the growth we see Chihiro go through. The villain is menacing but kind of undercooked, and I could have done with it the pirates noncing out over Sheeta who looks to be like half their age tops. Not too much to complain about though. This is still an enchanting work of art that I would recommend to anyone. It's got plenty to dig into with its messages that I haven't gone into here. I hope to watch it again in the near future, and to finally getting around to checking off the rest of the studio's films from my watch list. Also, not something that affects my opinion of the movie at all, but I can no longer hear about anything to do with magic crystals without finding it funny now. Thank you, Magic Batman, for rotting my brain.
This needs to be the best Christmas, the original.
Somehow, despite having a Letterboxd account for 5 years now, I've never logged a Christmas movie mid-July, even though for some reason I would find it very funny. Well, thank you, Klaus, for being part of this project so that I finally had an excuse to do just that. I just checked, I logged 8 crazy nights towards the end of last July, but you know what, we're just gonna We're just gonna pretend that I didn't do that. I caught and loved this movie when it first released, and hadn't rewatched it until it came time to make this video. I went in expecting to knock it down a few spots from where I had it before because of the third act breakup and poorly utilised soundtrack. And yeah, those still suck. The score isn't a problem, it's really nice, but the lyrical songs take me out of what should be really nice moments. They sound way too modern, making them feel out of place and stopping the emotions of the scenes from fully coming through. And I hate to write off the third act thing because tropes can be executed well, but this one's so self-indulgent with that "I'm not talking to you" bullshit that it really got on my nerves. I knew that they were going to be the sour spots of the film, but what I didn't expect is that the good stuff would be even better than I remembered, to the extent where this actually placed a few spots higher than I would have had it before. Pretty much every character in this movie is great. I love seeing Jesper become a more selfless person as he gets to see the tangible positive effect his operations are having on Smearensburg, which sounds like a place straight out of Green Eggs and Ham. I see the Emperor's New Groove comparisons brought up because they both redeem jerkish protagonists, but honestly I like Jesper even more than Kuzco since they let more of the emotional beats play out and have more space to breathe without any jokes. And even though I don't like how some parts of the liar reveal trope are handled, it still does feel pretty devastating when he's taken away from everyone, and a great show of his growth when he chooses to stay. I love Klaus and his own emotional baggage. The big reveal of why he has all these toys really hits like a truck. And the following bit of the main characters breaking up is fully justified, but it's great to see him be able to move on as he brings joy to the lives of these kids with the things he makes, even if they're not his own. I really liked Alva, who could have so easily been the bland love interest that grows to like Jesper in the end, but seeing her rediscover her passion and become the teacher she always wanted to be is really heartwarming. And the rest of the background characters aren't exactly thoroughly fleshed out, but they don't need to be. Getting to see this community come together and get over their petty forced hatred of each other, turning this gloomy, hostile nightmare of a village into a lovely place to live that people who spent years trying to escape from now don't even want to leave once they have the chance, is a great way to get across the movie's message of how one kind deed always inspires another. It's not even just a result of the kids wanting presents, because the adults get that across too, even though they have nothing to gain. It's such a strong message conveyed by an excellent cast of characters who all have great chemistry and fantastic performances backing them up. And holy shit, can we talk about that animation style? The 2D mimicking 3D styles like nothing else I've ever seen before. It's fluid, expressive, and the vibrant colours show just how much the town is able to be turned around from the way it starts out super bleak, with a fog that made it look like something straight out of Silent Hill. It's some truly jaw-dropping stuff. And I really like how many scenes are able to be carried by minimal dialogue, letting the characters' expressions do most of the talking. This is such a wonderful film. It's an incredibly compelling story about the origin of Santa Claus that shows off how pretty much every part of the character came to be in clever ways that never beat you over the head with it, all bolstered by some amazing animation, likable characters, and consistently solid jokes. But beyond it all, the emotional center is truly something to behold. It has a kind of warmth that I don't think anything else on this list quite captures, which is fine because they're all striving for very different things. Its handful of issues might prevent it from becoming one of my all-time favorites, but it's still a beautiful film about the value of kindness and community that's more than worth your time if you need something new to watch this holiday season.
I'm feeling happy, which is a big deal for me.
I've briefly talked about Batman Mask of the Phantasm in the past. If you want to see how I'd arbitrarily rank it against Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, the show that has that blue guy from Bocce the Rock, and various other games, shows and movies, then I'll link that video in the description. It was the shortest segment in that video because I didn't have a ton to say about it, and I still don't, but I think I could go into a bit more detail on what it is I like about it. As much as I love the Pattinson and Lego Batman, and even though I still prefer The Dark Knight as a movie overall, Mask of the Phantasm has my favourite portrayal of Batman in any of the films that I've seen. This broken man who has to weigh whether he should continue to fight crime to keep his promise, or if he can finally let himself live a normal life now that he has something else to live for. It's an exceptionally compelling internal conflict, and it results in some devastating emotional beats. I still can't get over the "I didn't count on being happy" scene. And out of all the films on this list, this is the only one where I actually cared about the main character's love life. That's helped by how Andrea is a well-defined character with her own motives and investing emotional baggage. The scenes of her and Bruce connecting are really sweet as well. It makes it sting so much more when things don't work out during the flashbacks, even though we already know Bruce ends up alone by the present day. That's all coupled with a great central mystery around the titular phantasm. It's fun to try and figure out their identity and motives, though I wouldn't want to spoil it in case you haven't seen it already. I thought they were a strong enough antagonistic force where I didn't mind the lack of Batman's usual rogues gallery. And then Joker becomes the second villain halfway through and he's a delight. great. I was surprised at how naturally integrated into the story he was. The voice cast was already really strong. Shout out to the late Kevin Conroy, he did an amazing job, and I can absolutely see why so many consider him the definitive Batman. And the highlight out of all of them for me is Mark Hamill as the Clown Prince of Crime. Every twisted joke and maniacal laugh from him is fantastic. He embodies the insanity of the character so well. I also got to give the action scenes their flowers. They range from good to phenomenal. The flashback with pre-Batman Bruce stopping the bandits is nuts, but it pales in comparison to the maskless police chase. The odds are stacked so heavily against Bruce, and he has to even stay out of sight after he sacrifices his cowl. It's so tense and exciting. And you know what the craziest part of this is? They managed to balance all of this. The relationship drama, the investigations into the Phantasm's murders, two villains, constant switching between the present and flashbacks, plenty of action scenes, all of it, in a runtime of only 76 minutes while remaining well-paced and consistently engaging. It's such an absurd achievement considering it was just supposed to be a prequel film to Batman the Animated Series, which I still haven't seen, but I'm sure it's good. It fills that role as a prequel really well, showing how Bruce became the Bat, with the scene where he dons the cowl for the first time going harder than it has any right to. About all I could fault this film for are a few cheats it takes with the main mystery, changing how a character is drawn and showing some important events out of order. Most of the movie's original side characters are really unmemorable, and some aspects of the ending aren't conveyed all that well, apparently contradicting the show and having to be explained in supplementary material. Also, Batman takes his sweet time chasing after the first victim at the start. You were right behind him, dude. What the hell took you so long? Those are kinda nitpicks in comparison to how good everything else is, though. I'd honestly go as far as to call it my favorite movie attached to a cartoon. Even more than ones where I've actually seen the shows and formed an attachment to the characters, like with Steven Universe, Regular Show, Phineas and Ferb, or even SpongeBob. And if any other DC animated movies are on this level, please let me know because I am very inexperienced with their wider filmography.
Listen, that was pretty terrifying, and I may have peed a little.
I am not all that familiar with Laika. I don't hear most of their stuff get talked about besides the two obvious exceptions, which are coincidentally the only two of their films that I've seen. One of those is Kubo and the Two Strings, which I liked and thought was good, but I couldn't say I was among the many die-hard fans of it. Coraline though, that one fully lived up to everything I'd heard about it. Purely on visuals, this might actually be my favourite on the list. Stop motion's already an animation style that boggles my mind even more than digital stuff. In this movie, just being fluid and expressive would already be super impressive. Then they pair it with some striking sets and some of the best character designs on the list. Not too dissimilar to Chicken Run and Klaus, the opening of this movie uses such a drab and dreary colour palette with the only spot of colour being Coraline's bright yellow raincoat, a great way to convey how boring she finds her new home. And it's of course contrasted so well with the fake world the other mother cooks up for her. Everything there is so much more vibrant, colourful and inviting, perfectly set up to lure Coraline into a false sense of security so that she'll be willing to stay. Then later, once other mothers no longer keeping up appearances, everything looks so horrifying as it all deteriorates. Other Mother herself in particular has a terrifying design. She's very creepy and would have scared the shit out of me if I watched this movie growing up. Hell, even when the mask is still on, the way she knows everything about Coraline, is bending over backwards to cater to her every whim to win her over, and even watches her as she sleeps makes it just as unsettling as later on, but more subtly. You always get the sense that there's more to it all than appears on the surface, but Coraline isn't going to notice it while she's being pandered to. The film wouldn't rank this high off of just good animation and an effectively creepy atmosphere though. It needed a strong story and cast of characters to back it up, which I think it has. Coraline is really sympathetic as the main character. Yeah, she's kinda bratty, but she's also a child. And it's perfectly understandable why she'd feel unfulfilled having her life upended to move to this new place that she finds boring away from all her friends. Especially as her parents are too distracted with their work to pay her any heed. At the same time though, her parents don't come off as maliciously neglectful, because as soon as they have their big work project out of the way or in a better position by the end, they do spend more time with her. They get frustrated with each other, but it's never in a way that feels like they don't love and care about one another. So it still manages to hit pretty hard emotionally when Coraline has to cry herself to sleep in her parents' bed after they get kidnapped. The ending is really nice as well, as Coraline's finally taking action and putting in that work to make her situation better, rather than expecting the world of her dreams to be handed to her on a silver platter. I like how the movie gets that across, as well as how everything has a price, and that if something feels too good to be true, it probably is. And that what you want isn't always what's best for you. I really enjoy most of the side characters too. They're all delightfully wacky and memorable. Both versions of Why Were You Born are good companions for Coraline. Mr. Babinski is really weird in an endearing way, and also he's voiced by the funny leopard, so that's amazing. The movie started to lose me a little with part of the two ladies' stage performance, but otherwise they were enjoyable. And then there's my favourite side character, the cat. The complete 180 I did from, oh, the cat showed up in the other world, please tell me he doesn't start talking, to, oh holy shit, Keith David voices a talking cat? I better not hear anyone else talk for the rest of the movie. It's unlike anything else I've experienced in ages. I love Keith David's voice, so every line from his character was music to my ears. All in all, this movie is amazing and fully lived up to everything I'd heard about it. I'd even say it stands alongside some of my all-time favorites now. And when I do my annual top 10 of my favorite media that I check out this year, you better believe this is making that list. Also, this ranking has helped me finish watching all of the 2009 Best Animated Feature Oscar nominees. And for as much as I love Up, if you ask me, I would absolutely have given the award to Fantastic Mr. Fox, but this is a close second. It's such a well-realized production that I thoroughly enjoyed all the way through. And now I have the desire to watch the rest of Laika's very short filmography in case I missed any other bangers like this. I think you can absolutely argue that it's the best film on this list, but it's not my favorite.
Hey, let go of my ego!
This video has provided me the chance to talk about so many kinds of films, all striving for different tones, visual styles, and target audiences. The bulk of them all excel in their own special ways that will appeal more to different people, which is really cool, and why I don't think I could say any particular one is the inherent best. If you were to give that title to Castle in the Sky, Coraline, or whatever else, I wouldn't even need to ask why. But in terms of my favorite of the bunch, yeah, none of the others ever really stood a chance. The Lego Movie might not be the first movie released under the Warner umbrella, but it was the first one for this specific Warner studio, and now I think it should be clear from how high they ranked why I chose to include both this and Phantasm. Like I've said before, the easiest way for a movie to get into my good graces is to be able to balance strong comedy and emotional moments, which this movie delivers on beautifully. Despite how many times I've seen it already, I must have laughed more at this than I did for everything else on the list combined. The visual gags are clever, the characters all have great chemistry, and there are no weak links in the voice cast. Everything is timed to perfection, and it manages to capture such a consistently high level of energy to tell all of its jokes with confidence without spelling into the overly wacky and quirky type of humour that I struggle to connect with. It also makes full use of the animation style at its disposal. Every set piece is distinct and memorable, with many being bright and vibrant without being oversaturated rainbow vomit, not even the one where that would have been completely on brand. And every quick, snappy movement helps make every scene feel as kinetic and alive as it needs to be. The commitment to having everything, even the smear frames being actual Lego pieces, is something I really admire. And on top of it looking great, this is the movie on the list where the animation style feels the most intrinsically linked with the movie's story and messages. It really pushes the idea that everyone has limitless creative potential in them, which Legos facilitate perfectly. With the right bricks, anyone can build anything they set their mind to. The only limit is their imagination. Of course, it wouldn't have taken the top spot off of jokes alone. Those only serve to back up the excellent story and cast of characters. Even Benny and Unikitty, who are the clear weaker links of the main cast to me, still have plenty of great jokes and setups that get paid off near the end. I think on my last rewatch I found the spaceship jokes a little annoying, but I've come around on them this time. Metalbeard and Batman are a lot of fun as well. Vitruvius is probably the funniest of all the supporting cast to me. I really love Morgan Freeman's performance for the senile old man, and I'm very thankful at how they avoid a lot of trappings they could have easily fallen into with Wildstyle. Rather than make her the generic one-dimensional BA badass who gets with the guy in the end for no reason other than it's an animated film, romance is mandatory, she actually gets a well-written arc. We get to see her struggle with the realization that she isn't the one mentioned in the prophecy and kinda resent Emmett for it. But she warms up to him the more time they spend together, and she gets to see his value by how he's able to come up with ideas of his own that even the Master Builders don't. Then towards the end, after Emmett makes his big sacrifice, she stops looking down on people and gives her big speech on TV to rally all the citizens together against the robot invasion. And it's all done without her ever becoming annoyingly bitter or sacrificing her competence or fighting skill. I don't even mind the fact that she and Emmett get together in the end, because they have the two form a natural connection and never get bogged down in the romance. It's only focused on in a few scenes. Speaking of Emmett, he's my favourite character in the film and my favourite protagonist of any film I've talked about in this video. For as easy as it's become to clown on Chris Pratt for being the default animated main character casting nowadays, I still think he fit Emmett perfectly. He works really well as an everyman, bringing that excitable goofball charm while knowing when to dial it back for the emotional moments and make them feel sincere. And the journey that Emmett goes on, initially just going along with what everyone else is doing until he's told how much it makes him blend in with the crowd, before the prophecy is able to give him a purpose to strive towards, and then that's all taken away from him, is so well done. All the plans he's able to come up with by bringing a different perspective than the Master Builders, again speaks to the unlimited creative potential inside of everybody and suits the Lego setting perfectly. And even once he finds out the prophecy was made up, he's still prepared to sacrifice himself to save everyone else, showing that someone's ability to do good isn't defined by some arbitrary ranking or status. When he finally becomes a Master Builder, it feels so triumphant, and I like that his newfound skills aren't what ultimately take the villain villain out, but his ability to connect with people and empathize with Lord Business' headspace of not feeling special. The speech he gives and how that mirrors with the real world side of things, with Finn's dad discovering his son's creativity, then changing his restrictive viewpoint when he sees that the villain of his son's story is just a reflection of him stifling that imagination, with it switching between the two worlds as both Will Ferrells go in for the hug, is so damn beautiful. My favourite scene across this film and all of the others that I've talked about today. I struggle to get across how much I love this movie because there's so much to praise about it that I can't condense into a ranking segment this short. Every aspect of it is firing on all cylinders, and there isn't really any baggage dragging it down. The fact it didn't at least get a nomination for Best Animated Feature at the Oscars is embarrassing. Though with that said, even though this was my personal favourite movie of that year, I don't think I could justify saying that it should have won over Isao Takahata's swan song masterpiece. Definitely would have been a better pick than Big Hero 6 though. Come on Academy, what are we doing here? It's fitting though that this is still a phenomenal film, regardless of whatever status gets allocated to it by a meaningless trophy or lack thereof. The Lego Movie remains one of my favourite movies, even over a decade after its release, and my favourite debut film for any animation studio that I've seen. So that's my ranking of all these animation studios' debut outings. And I should make it crystal clear that the goal here is not a celebration of the studios themselves, but the creatives that worked on the films. Even the movies I didn't like still had a ton of work and passion put into them. And in an era where studio executives are more actively making anti-art decisions than ever, that just makes me further appreciate all the work put in by the animators, writers, directors, and everyone else who had a hand in these movies. Not all of them were great, but I'd still say I had a lot of fun going through them. There were only 2.5 out of the 14 I can say I didn't like, while the rest range from decent to some of my favourite films in general. And most are so drastically different in terms of both writing and visual presentation that it means they all got to stand out much more than if I were ranking a single studio's output. I have one more film ranking planned for the remainder of the year, but I'm not expecting it to be nearly as positive as this or the Pixar one. It's planned to be a semi-collaborative project with a friend of mine where we both release our videos on the same day. Speaking of which, he's going to be releasing his own ranking of the Lego movies around this time. So if it's out, which it probably is by now because he's a much faster worker than me, I'll link it in the description and you can go watch it if you're interested. If you want to see when I start going through the films for my next ranking, I'll link my Letterboxd page in the description. There you can see what I've been watching while I was editing this. Maybe I've already started watching the movies for the next video. See if you can guess what the topic will be. I'll also have a list on there with all the movies from this video so you can see if any of my opinions change given enough time. Maybe I'll add some more movies further down the line for other studios that I didn't cover here. Let me know if you have any recommendations and maybe I'll check some of them out. Alright, that'll do it for now. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, see you in the next one.